Morning. Maybe yesterday's video wasn't the last after all from this room. And me saying it is leads me directly to where I'm going today. I'm going to talk about truth. Truth and lies. Truth and not true. True and false. Remember when it seemed in simpler times when you made a statement or read something, you could rest assured to say it's true. And then if you read something else, you'd say not true, if that's how it seemed to you, the truth or a lie. Then we started, I don't know exactly when, but putting a gradation on both true and false. We started saying partly true, mostly true, as some kind of measurement that some truth was included, it seemed to us, but being coupled with not truth didn't make it a complete falsehood. And the same thing happened with false, partly true. And I was just thinking that when we started utilizing gray areas to our advantage, not white, not black, not true, not false, somewhere in between. We use this for our purposes. Maybe it was a compromise to try to placate, to try to eradicate, to try to lessen arguments based on polarities. Maybe it was part of a more sophisticated vision or approach to the world as we found it. Perhaps it lent itself to being truth in the future. The elements within the truth that were less than true might become true. Whatever the reason, recently, with the beautiful term that I like so much, because it's just a reflection of the times in which we live. And that's these two words, plausible deniability. It's possible, it's within the realms of events unfolding that you might either admit or deny. It gave you the wiggle room. And politicians latched onto this. If George Carlin was alive today, he could do a whole bit, a whole take on plausible deniability. And it would be, he's a master at seeing the irony, the ridiculousness of couching the couching ability of language used in a nefarious way to give you an out. And I was thinking, now where is this? I know it's writ large in our political arena that seems to envelop us all. It's almost unavoidable. So much inundation from media, internet, television, newspapers, magazines, all the pundits, the political pundits. And one of George Carlin's, because I too share his insight on language, how that it can be used as a tool precisely, or how it can lead to confusion, misrepresentation. So here we are, plausible deniability. Again, writ large on our probably overemphasis on the political arena, political platform, as we seem to have leaders worldwide that don't seek to unify anymore. They seek quite the opposite, to divide, to only cater to their supporters, while vilifying those that don't bow at their feet. But without, for me personally, without finding the humor in everything, particularly in these trying days, these days that mystify or minimize intellectuality, thinking for ourselves, making up our own minds, not buying into sound bites. But plausible deniability is just kind of the epitome. I suspect that it might come to represent, in the lens of history, our current environment. What's good, what's bad. And for the most part, I don't find it that disturbing, because when you look in the nature of duality, within the seed of one opposite is its polarity. Happiness has a seed of sadness. Sadness, likewise, has a seed of happiness. So anything that leads us away from polarity, duality, seeing the world as two, when in fact it is, has, and always will be one. And I've mentioned before, but it fits in with what I want to bring it up again. Part of the awakening process for me, the 2-day experience that It's coming up on 6 years ago for me. Wow, time flies. Whew. Was the reconciliation of diametrically opposed thoughts, conditions, such as love, hate, tall, short, fat, thin, fear, peace. The one that was my aha moment was something that I'd always thought about. It's kind of like the old nature-nurture argument. I was never too vested in that argument, but the argument that apparent duality that was the source of my new understanding brought about as part of the awakening process is destiny and free will. Preordained, the preordained will our life be a certain way. No matter what we do, are we free agents? Is it free will? Free will? Are we free to create our own destiny, destination? So and in the process of reconciling these diametrically opposed positions, these polarities, I looked one way at free will, and I was able to, with 100% surety and conviction, say, yes, indeed. And after celebrating this enveloping vision and ultimate liberation of free will, I went to the preordained, the destiny. And I turned and I looked at this seeming paradox, this polarity. And I was able to look at that and understand, yes, indeed, destiny, preordained. So I was able, without exploding, I was able to conceptualize, to encapsulate, to include with equal conviction and understanding these seemingly and heretofore unreconcilable for me. Entertain them at the same time. And this was my aha moment, and this was followed by what seemed like hours of belly laugh that would be going from a hugest belly laugh to a crying jag with equal intensity, seemingly flawlessly moving from one into the other, so that if there's anybody nearby, they would thought that you're off your rocker. This is a breakdown. Instead, it was a breakthrough. Now I understood that the world is non-dualistic. All those seeming polarities the opposites were equally so at the same time, simultaneously. And this was the true, if I had a defining moment, say when I was liberated from the world of Maya, when I was able to see my ego for what it is, to understand that you don't lose your ego. It's not something to conquer. Equally as the mind is not something to defeat, to conquer, to silence. You have to see the ego for what it is. The jokester, every tradition, indigenous traditions in particular, from American Indian to early American natives to throughout the world, the trickster. And this is what I saw the ego to be. A trickster that played at creation. Actually with some degree of success, because to this day, most of the people identify with this trickster invented sense of self, sense of the world. This Maya, this illusion that was masterfully created by the ego trickster. So much so that 95 to 99% of people walking the earth today identify this magnificent, magical achievement as reality. And as if so this is a total dependency on the five senses. And it's, remember, is it what we see? Because I know when I study about the eyes, what we see is inverted. Our mind puts it back so that we see things as they appear to be, as we think they are. And if you went through every sense, since that's the eyes, and I think we're all dependent on our eyes, then you would know that the other senses, taste, hearing, the other senses, smell, might be equally misleading in that the mind is interpreting, controlling, it seems from our perspective, controlling our senses. So to see is to believe. I turned that around actually. To believe is to see. And this sense of belief is another thing that we accumulated through egoic influence and encouragement. These beliefs that surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, keep the ego's fragile creation in place. There's no belief or belief system that is acceptable for most, that includes changing who they think they are. belief systems support, build up. But the ego trickster is fragile, and its grasp on us is tenuous at best. But it does take events, circumstances, understanding. I want to say effort, but effortless would be equally so. So this reconciliation, this understanding that opposites indeed are not opposite, that this is a sphere, and that as you go around the sphere from or on the horizon, on the diameter. I need a refresher on my geometry. Radius. Okay, on the radius between connecting these polarities, love and hate. It's spinning this way, it's growing this way, so you'll see that there's varying degrees. I had a dear friend who studied human sexuality, the history of human sexuality, and with a particular emphasis on choice, gender. And she talked about ancient people saw sexuality not as a polarities, male, female, yin, yang, that in fact all of us were somewhere on this sphere of sexuality, if you will. Even this males beginning with XY chromosomes, some of each. So this idea that sexuality was not either or, but it was, it left a myriad of possibilities, which seems more in keeping with what I experience people to be. I can feel my feminine side, and I'm so grateful for the love and compassion that it embraces, that it represents. And I can feel my masculine side equally as much. To be a manly man while keeping, it's not a conflict, it's not an either or, while embracing my femininity, not as a weakness, but a contributor to the strength. And this can be seen in our attitude to life. Are we passive? Are we active? Do we engage? Are we disengaged? Again, polarities. And engaging life, participating in life, has its time and place. Just as a cat is stretched out in complete repose, just resting, but a bird flies by the window, they're in immediate attack mode. Seize the moment. When opportunity comes our way, there's time for action. There's time for reaction. And equally so is no action. So-called passive resistance. I live in a country that's essentially based on Taiwan, the Chinese society is essentially based on passive resistance. I remember watching administrators when there was the administrators, the staff. I came to learn after 18 years in the Taiwan educational university system that the staff had the real power. The teachers and the students were essentially, basically powerless. But this passive resistance, the secretary, the president's secretary, probably the most important person, the most powerful person at the institution, on his or her desk, they would have stacked, and she would deal in a methodical, organized fashion, take a look, and if it's something that she didn't like, or he didn't like, it represented a change, either whether it's more work, actual change in the system, very resistant to what I talked about, relentless change. These people must suffer a lot in the face of the reality of change. But that's where passive resistance, something comes up that they don't like, for whatever reason. It goes to the bottom of the pile, and it might take a year to surface again, only to be returned in the bottom of the pile. So this passive resistance has to do, the key is essentially never having to deal with what you don't support or what you don't like. But I see this as the country is run. The only time, which is a good thing for me, because confrontations are severely limited. People don't get in your face. In fact, they go out of their way to save your face, not rub your nose in it. Only time is, unfortunately, in traffic. The anonymity of being a driver in a tinted window car. I guess that's the time for many of them to work out their aggressive tendencies. But other than that, you don't really have to deal with this in-your-face kind of people or approach. My way or the highway. It's more like up to you. And who really, upon any reflection, would object to a society that's essentially saying, it's up to you? Living as a foreigner all these years in this country, I've been free, a degree of freedom that I never had in my own home country. Free for two reasons. I continue to understand or speak very little Chinese. In fact, I could have put effort into not learning, because it's an insulator. It's a protective. I know how to communicate well enough. I know how to get what I need or want and never do without. But I don't have to listen to everybody's 2 cents worth about anything. And the truth was told, whatever I think, feel, see, for most is beyond the pale. Who cares what a foreigner thinks? I've often laughed, as long as I keep my clothes on, I don't run outside screaming naked down the street, that I'm pretty free to live my life as I choose. A freedom much greater than I found or would find in my homeland. So language is important, and that's why, coming full circle to plausible deniability, while being aggravating at times, as a pass, as a get out of jail free, as a non-committal, the epitome of a committed position. Wiggle room. While I abhor some of the excesses that it can be used to cover up, at the same time, I appreciate the shades of gray. I no longer see the world in terms of good or bad. It's inclusive. Where there is good, inherently there will be bad. Where there is happiness, there will be sadness. Where there is light, there will be night. Without its opposite, it loses its flavor of existence. It was never night, it was always daylight. The concept of night wouldn't exist, but neither would light. The opposite are equally so, should be embraced, that they can occur at the exact same time without, and seamlessly, without any problem. Sit on that for a while.